Greetings to everyone with us. On behalf of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, I would like to welcome you to the next lecture within the Open JP2 lectures series in this academic year. This series is organized by the St. John Paul II Institute of Culture, which is part of our Faculty of Philosophy here at Angelicum. Today's lecture, as well as the entire JP2 lecture series, would not be possible without the support of our university authorities, whom I would like to kindly thank. Special thanks are also owed to the founders of St. John Paul II Institute of Culture, donors and supporters of the Institute, our audience and all viewers in front of the screens who are joining us via internet connection. The St. John Paul II Institute of Culture was established to look at the challenges facing the modern world at the Church in light of the thought and heritage of St. John Paul II. The idea of thinking with John Paul II has been embodied in the JP2 lecture series delivered by prominent interdisciplinary scholars who revisit the extraordinary contributions of John Paul II for our own day. It is now my great honor to welcome and introduce today's special guest, Professor Jolanta Rzegocka, a historian of theatre and associate professor of Anglo-American literature at the Jagiellonian University in Kraków. Her research explores theatre as a social and cultural practice that shape public virtues, participation, and collective memory. She is the author of the book Watching the Virtues, Labels, Drama, and the Teaching of Civic Virtues in the Jesuit Theatre of Poland, Lithuania, published by Brill in 2025. She is a research member of the COST, Action Participate, examining participation through prayer in the late medieval and early modern world. She has also hosted Restless at Home with Poland, a cultural history TV series, including a dedicated Italian cycle on Poland's artistic and intellectual connections with Europe. In her lecture titled Thinking the World Through Theatre, Karol Wojtyła's Dramatic Imagination, Jolanta Rzegocka will revisit John Paul II's involvement in the theatre as well as his early dramatic works to argue that theatrical metaphor and practice greatly influence his thought regarding humanity's relation to the Creator, to language, to culture, and to the self. We will also ask what this restless theatrical energy of the Pope might still offer us today. Professor Rzegocka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Father, for your generous and very kind introduction. And thank you to everybody who, despite the weather, the Roman weather, made their way today to the lecture. And it's a real honor to be speaking today here in a hall that remembers and saw the doctoral journeys, not of one, but of two popes, as I hear. So quite a special place. My talk today is about theater. And I'd like to start with the Hamlet, Shakespeare's exploration of drama and life. In Hamlet, we find one of the most interesting reflections on the nature of theater in Western literature. Inviting a group of actors to the Danish court to perform before the king, the prince is very well aware of the extraordinary power of theater, of dramatic representation. And he declares at one point the place, the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. In these lines, Hamlet makes an insight that goes far beyond the world of the stage. It's not only about theater, it's also about life. Theater, he suggests, has the capacity to reveal truth that ordinary speech often fails to disclose. And through performance, hidden realities come into light. Dramatic action becomes a mirror in which human motives, conflicts, and moral tensions appear with great clarity. And this is, of course, a very strong argument in favor of theater. And the knowledge of theater and the knowledge that theater gives us that dates back to Aristotle and the Greek tragedians. It is part of this famous ancient quarrel, as my students know by now. And while Plato expelled poets, and we could add also expelled actors from his Republic, arguing that theater impairs reason and is a long way off the truth, Aristotle, here in beautiful Rembrandt's painting, welcomed them back, seeing tragedy as a journey from ignorance to knowledge, ultimately prompting, activating this catharsis, that special type of pity and fear generated by watching a character coming to some terrible knowledge on stage. And to illustrate how divisive the view of theater has been over the centuries, let me take you to Lublin in the east of Poland. This picture I took just now in winter. They had a harsh winter this year. Lublin in the east of Poland, to the beautiful Byzantine-style chapel of the Polish king and the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Władysław Jogaila, where among the breathtaking frescoes, we see a striking fresco depicting the mocking of Christ. I took a picture of it. It's a bit high up, so I did my best. In this scene, Christ is surrounded by musicians and performers, some playing instruments, others behaving like actors or jesters, with two of them even shown turning an upside-down flip. The image powerfully reflects the historical suspicion, the disbelief towards theatricality, associating performance with mockery and ridicule in the Passion narrative. I would just add that Lublin is where Karol Wojtyła became, in 1956, head of the chair of ethics at Catholic University of Lublin, where he taught philosophy and ethics to his students, where he was also a mentor as he traveled from Krakow, where he served as an auxiliary bishop and later as archbishop, and he would certainly see this fresco cycle on many occasions. Going back to Hamlet's positive view of theater that I began with, his embracing of theater, we can see that some intuition and some of the same intuition resonate in a striking way with the life and intellectual formation of Karol Wojtyła, Pope John Paul II. In a remarkable twist of history, the young actor from Wadowice and Kraków, who once performed poetry and drama in clandestine underground theater under a Nazi German occupation of Poland, would one day step into the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and speak to the entire world. As I look today at the dramatic works of Karol Wojtyła, I would like to argue that theatrical metaphor and theater practice helped him rethink history, rethink suffering, rethink human vocation and one's sense of self, and to look into humanity's relationship with the transcendent. To explore this idea, I will organize my reflections in two movements. I will first briefly examine Wojtyła as homo theatralis, as he called himself, the theatrical man, and then I will explore how his life transcended the stage, becoming a performance, a living expression of Theatrum Mundi, the theater of the world. And I also want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to work as a theater historian on Wojtyła's theater at this time of Lent. In fact, one of his dramas, Jeremiah, is set during this particular liturgical season. I call it a purple play, and I've taken this task of working with Wojtyła's dramas as my own small Lenten challenge. Theatrical experience that accompanied Wojtyła from the very beginning of his life was very colorful. His theatrical sensibility, his passion for theater, emerged remarkably early. Already during his final years of secondary school, he was actively involved in theatrical productions in his native town of Wadowice, and we see him right in the middle in this photograph. Before the war, Wadowice was a typical Polish town with a vibrant civic and cultural life. It had good schools, an active intelligentsia, and a strong sense of community fostered through parish life, Catholic sodalities, and various cultural associations. Teachers, local professionals, and workers alike participated in these initiatives and created a very nice, very supportive environment where literature, theater, and intellectual discourse were valued. Wadowice was also home to a large Jewish community with whom the young Wojtyła shared everyday life, and he would later recall many of them as friends. Tragically, the community was wiped out during Nazi German occupation of Poland. So I'm looking at this context today because we all know how important those first experiences can be. The first visit to a theater, a football match, or a church. Such moments often leave a lasting impression and can shape a young person's imagination and even a sense of vocation. And I'm sure everybody's now thinking on their firsts. Just the other day, we heard Pope Leo XIV give Polish pilgrims a very special greeting, encouraging them to practice a long-standing Lenten devotion, gorzkie żale, which can be translated as bitter sorrows. This is a traditional 18th century Polish Catholic devotion and a liturgical service which focuses on the Passion of Jesus Christ and the sorrows of the Virgin Mary. And I can see Father Cezary is looking at it. It's a picture from a Polish church in Ireland. I just found it. I thought it's very nice. They come together to celebrate their devotions at Lent. It is held in every parish on Sundays in Lent, and it is sung as a kind of dramatic lamentation of soul about the suffering of Jesus and the dialogue with Our Lady. So a kind of a dialogue of the soul with Jesus and Our Lady. And Karol Wojtyła would definitely attend those devotions, and there are elements of choral recitations of that kind also in his early dramas. Perhaps one of the most memorable and most meaningful places for young Karol Wojtyła was Our Lady Shrine at Kalwaria Zebrzydowska, a shrine of Franciscan observance, some 14 kilometers from Wadowice, so a good 3-hour walk if you plan a pilgrimage. This is where he was a regular with his father, participating in the dramatic and spectacular reenactments of the Way of the Cross, held annually in Kalwaria at Passiontide. These reenactments are being held to the present day, and in fact, Kalwaria also was where Pope celebrated his last Holy Mass in Poland on August the 19th, 2002. At Wadowice, he would also join in the communal spectacles of youth, from football matches to literary gatherings and theater. And in 1938, he's already a student of Polish philology at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. This is a year of new friendships, literary inspirations, and great hopes. While studying Polish literature at the Jagiellonian, he begins writing his own poetry and plays. However, the outbreak of the Second World War on September the 1st, 1939, gave his life and his writing a new tragic impetus. In fact, the Germans were in Krakow already on September the 6th, and very soon a major change began. Under the conditions of Nazi German occupation, dramatic performance became an act of cultural resistance. And Karol Wojtyła, while keeping his day job at the quarry, which was part of the Solvay chemical works, he also soon joined the underground theatre group founded by Mieczysław Kotlarczyk, his mentor and role model from Wadowice. The group that would later become the Rhapsodic Theatre, Teatr Rhapsodyczny, was founded on August 22nd, 1941, in a private apartment in Krakow. During the occupation, its members met secretly in various clandestine apartments to read and perform poetry and drama. They gathered twice a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 6 p.m., taking advantage of the earlier work hours in German-run institutions on those 2 days. Despite the difficult wartime conditions, the Rhapsodic Theatre managed to stage 7 clandestine productions. And when I say 7 productions, it actually means there were over 100 rehearsals and 22 performances that we know of. And that is to keep the spirit alive under occupation. And it just reminds me, as I'm speaking today, of this deeply symbolic, more of Krakow, of this deeply symbolic Poems in Shelters project initiated by Polish and Ukrainian poets in 2022, whereby poetry is being read in air raid shelters in the city of Drohobych in Ukraine as a form of resistance to the Russian attacks on Ukraine, with words that are very human, free, strong, and true, that offer comfort and grounding. In these hushed gatherings in Krakow during the Nazi German occupation, theatricality was not about spectacle. Quite the opposite. The Rhapsodic Theatre emphasized the primacy of the word. It was the theatre of the word. Actors stood almost motionless, speaking the text with intense concentration. The stage was reduced to a room. Gesture and scenery were nearly eliminated. Words were spoken quietly, but they carried immense weight. Wojtyła felt deeply connected to this vision and this style of delivery. And while Rhapsodic project was partly a response to the realities of occupation, it also emerged from the living idea promoted by Mieczysław Kotlarczyk of renewing Polish theatre through language. Wojtyła wrote about this theatre. The supremacy of the word over gesture restores thought's primacy over movement and reflects in man. It turns out that thought is by no means stagnant. It has its own motion. It is precisely this motion, the dynamics of thought, that the living word captures, making it the seed of action. So word as the impetus for action. By 1949, when the theatre group came together, Wojtyła would already have written a handful of poems, lyrical poetry, sonnets, and 3 plays. The 3 early plays are David, that is now lost, Job, and Jeremiah. And actor and director of one of his plays in 1980s, Tadeusz Malak, observed that, having worked with his dramatic material, he has observed that Wojtyła's plays seem to be almost deliberately designed for the rhapsodic stage, for recitation. Especially the structure of his later post-war plays that are kind of meditations does not actually focus around plot or action, but rather about an idea. It's an exchange of ideas on the stage. So the core of the drama is problem itself. And the situations that are depicted on stage are, first of all, illustrations of this philosophical and spiritual question. And it was then, in those early years in Krakow, that, as I already mentioned, Karol Wojtyła would describe himself in a letter to a friend, half playfully but also quite seriously, as a homo theatralis, a theatrical human being. And this phrase is amazingly strong. It suggests someone who perceives reality in terms of dramatic structures. That was his filter for the world. So he would make note of scenes, of gestures, of revelations, on conflicts and transformations. And in a letter written in November 1939, this is actually the building of the philological faculty of Jagiellonian University, where Karol Wojtyła studied, and the plaque commemorates him as a student. This is the poetry in shelters in Drohobycz. You can see Ryszard Krynicki in the lower photograph assisting, and some of the people gathering there. In a letter written in November 1939 to Mieczysław Kotlarczyk, Wojtyła confessed that in fact he thought in images that are very theatrical, was his admission. And in the same letter, at the same time, he described his early poetry as an attempt to learn how to speak about reality. In these poems, he wrote, "I'm learning to speak before I begin to converse." Across these experiences, we can clearly see that what might be described as a theatrical element in Wojtyła's life it extended from youthful performance to literary experimentation in underground theater, and then went into his further philosophical reflections. And within this theatrical element, Wojtyła and many of his friends in his generation discovered that it was means of connecting and relating to their own tragic historical moment. Interestingly, Karol Wojtyła originally published his poems under pseudonyms, and the first intentionally incomplete edition of poems and plays under his own name appeared only in 1980s. It's right there on my desk. He saw poetry as a calling, and in his later life he would fully admit that he had not devoted himself completely to poetry. And he would say very famously, "Poetry is a great lady to whom one must give oneself entirely. I feel I have not treated her quite properly." But this awareness also shows why he engaged with poetry as a student and later as a priest. In one of his early poems, he reflects on the limits of language when we attempt to describe the deepest human experience. So we have the English translation of Bolesław Taborski and the original side by side. Sometimes, Wojtyła writes, in the course of conversation, we find ourselves standing before truths for which we lack words, for which we lack gesture and sign, because no word, gesture, or sign can carry the whole image, which we must enter alone, struggling, as Jacob did. It's again this biblical reference. Here, his dramatic and poetic sensibility captures a crucial aspect of human experience, these moments in between, the moments of truth and of solitary confrontation with truth that are at the heart of life itself. Poetry offered Wojtyła a way to name human reality. At some point, it also allowed him to break free from traditional aesthetic conventions of romantic and modernist theater, and his later dramas become poetic meditations in themselves. They were called by his translator, Karl Dedecius, poetry of thought. The year 1942 marked the formation of Wojtyła's priestly vocation. In October 1942, after the death of his father, Wojtyła had already written 3 plays and completed 3 years of Polish studies at the Jagiellonian, and that is including 2 years in clandestine evening courses. And he began theological studies in the secret university's Faculty of Theology, which had been shut down by the communist authorities. Today it is part of the Pontifical University of John Paul II in Krakow. Until 1944, he continued to perform in the Rhapsodic Theatre, but due to the danger of arrest, these arrests were intensified after the outbreak of the Warsaw Uprising in August 1944. he was invited to move in with other seminarians in the Archbishop's house of Krakow under the direction of Archbishop Adam Sapieha. In his later plays, Wojtyła developed his rhapsodic style, emphasizing that it served meditation rather than drama. In this way, both his form and his voice were evolving. As he recalled in conversations with André Froissart in his 1982 interview that was turned into the book, it was a time in which he undertook fundamental reassessments and decisions about his future. He consciously set aside the path of the artist as poet and actor and discovered a different, divinely appointed calling, the path to the priesthood. The young actor of the underground Rhapsodic Theatre eventually became a priest, then a bishop, and finally Pope. And when Pope John Paul II appeared on that balcony of St. Peter's Basilica in October 1978, he stepped into one of the most visible stages of global history. The Rhapsodic Theatre has been the subject of careful historical research, especially by theatre historians led by Professor Jacek Popiel. Their work has shed light on two decisions by the authorities of the post-war regime of the Polish People's Republic to suppress the group. Archival material gathered by the security service, personal files, internal notes, reports from agents and informants have survived, and they reveal the scale of official scrutiny. The theatre was formally dissolved in 1953 during Stalinist period. And so Wojtyła's generation was a generation formed in the years of independent Poland, and we see that formation in him as well as in his friends, intellectually open, rooted in Poland's multicultural past, and free from the ideological frameworks imposed after the war. All of these resonate in his dramas. And before I move on to briefly look at his plays today, I would like to underline the second dimension of Wojtyła's dramatic imagination, and this is the one that emerges through the ancient, very old metaphor of theatrum mundi, the world as a stage. As we know that few figures in modern history have so literally moved from the theater to the world of stage, and the proposition of reading Pope John Paul II as an actor on the great stage of the world was first put forward by Krakow theater scholar Dariusz Kosiński, and I fully support it. I do not agree with his argument that John Paul II's influence had nothing to do with his philosophy and his writings or decisions regarding the church. I think they did. But I think JP2, the Pope's Institute at Angelicum here, is perhaps the best place to talk about it. But what I agree with, when I think along the lines suggested by Dariusz Kosiński, is that his influence was shaped above all by the figure, by his character, by whom he became. A figure he created and performed on the Polish and on the global and even on the transcendent stage, the great theater of the world. Kosiński sees the Pope as the highest embodiment of the Polish romantic hero coming to life, prophetic, suffering figure whose destiny is linked with the destiny of his tormented nation, taking the nation into future triumph, a hero recognized by the world and confirmed by God. Wojtyła brought to life this great ancient Polish myth, so often ridiculed even by his own people, and played out on global scale through successive acts of his life. From his first pilgrimage to Poland in 1979, where he invoked the Holy Spirit to descend and renew the face of the earth, through the assassination attempt to his death, surrounded by what may be the greatest miracle of all, the spiritual and social unification of the Polish people. Of course, his theatrical formation had already trained him to understand the power of symbolic gestures, ritual language, and public encounters. The metaphor of theatrum mundi therefore helps us understand how Wojtyła's dramatic thinking shaped his papal role. His pontificate was deeply conscious of gesture and symbolic action, pilgrimages, public prayer, encounters with crowds, and historical reconciliations. Let us now look at Wojtyła's plays more systematically so that we see the body of his dramatic input. These are 5 plays, and together they form what might be described as a dramatic anthropology of JP2, exploring the fundamental experiences that shape human existence. So we have David, a play that was lost. We know he wrote it early in the early days of the war in 1939. We have Job, and the one that followed right after was Jeremiah. And then after the war, he would write those meditative plays, The Bride of Our God, The Jeweler's Shop, and The Radiation of Fatherhood. The first ones are often catalogued as juvenile plays, and 3 later ones as mature plays. And this is if we look at the human life as in terms of fruition, as growing up, as coming to a more perfect form, which I argue is not always a case. So I tend to look at them as a whole. As a meditation on human suffering today, the first surviving play, Job, resonates deeply with the tragedies of the 20th century. Well, actually, both Job and Jeremiah respond to the trauma of war as they interpret historical suffering through the language of the Bible. Job depicts unexpected and undeserved suffering, portraying a man that is, in a sense, a puppet of God. We follow Job's personal journey, accompanied by friends, with his wife by his side, yet the emphasis is on his personal experience of suffering and faith. The opening of Job presents a powerful scene of Satan addressing God and testing Job, an image that echoes the opening of Polish romantic drama Kordian by Juliusz Słowacki. In Kordian, the symbolic preparation takes place on New Year's Eve, and Satan commands demons like demiurges to shape the spiritual destinies of the future political leaders. So there is a little connection here as well with Job. Wojtyła situates the drama in what he calls a Job-like time. The action takes place in a time of waiting. He wants to highlight the universality of Job and the relevance of his history to modern men as he writes to his friend. And we have William Blake's Job to look at. So the young Wojtyła announces, I have written a new drama, Greek in form, Christian in spirit, eternal in substance, like every man. A drama about suffering, Job. Some people here quite like it. It is partly the result of my reading of the Old Testament. I have read David's Psalms, the book of Job, the book of wisdom, now the prophets. There are also echoes in Job. This is the Everyman, the original edition and one of the modern rewritings of Everyman by Carol Ann Duffy. So there are interesting echoes of King Lear here in Job, the experience of undeserved loss, the questioning of fate, even the motive of all-encompassing storm towards the end of the play. Yet, unlike Lear, Job looks up to God for deliverance and does not lose hope, speaking from the heart in moments of extreme experience. Friends in this play remind Job of God's mercy, and this, I found, is the earliest dramatic reference to mercy in Wojtyła's writings. It prefigures the cult and ideas of divine mercy that would become so central to John Paul II. Through Job, we see how Karol Wojtyła connects the biblical roots of mercy in the Old Testament to its living expression in Christian faith. And the world premiere of Job took place at the Teatr Ludowy in Krakow. Well, you would be surprised, on March the 26th, 1983. So it took a while to take it to stage. And the director was already quoted, Tadeusz Malak. In both Job and Jeremiah, Wojtyła's dramatic imagination performs a striking move. It transforms historical experience, history, into sacred drama. In contrast to Job, the play Jeremiah presents the figure of the prophet modeled after the 16th century royal preacher and Jesuit Piotr Skarga, and the biblical Jeremiah, where salvation and deliverance are shown as communal experience, not so much personal as in the earlier play. Here, the emphasis is on the responsibility for the common good and service to others, highlighting the social and ethical dimensions of faith. The prophet, Jeremiah or Piotr Skarga, carry the burden of their people, and history itself becomes a stage upon which ancient prophetic voices return to interpret contemporary crisis. Jeremiah is a theatrical response to national crisis, and it is set symbolically, as I've already said, on Palm Sunday. The drama places contemporary suffering within liturgical time. So ritual and history intersect in this case. And here in drama, we see the prophet cry for the transformation of hearts and communal renewal. And there is this very strong line, transform, przemień. It functions almost like a prophetic cue in a drama and recalls Jeremiah and Father Piotr's declaration. And of course, I've already mentioned that, but let me repeat, this idea is later echoed in John Paul II's papal sermon in Warsaw in 1979. About Jeremiah, Wojtyła wrote to Kotlarczyk in the summer of 1940 the following lines. It came into being almost instantly, like a revelation, while reading the prophecies of Jeremiah. And he added that the play already at this moment takes shape quite clearly as one part of a tetralogy. Well, the tetralogy was never written. And again, the world premiere of Jeremiah took place on December 11, 1981, at the Teatr Polski, directed by Marek Mokrowiecki in Bielsko-Biała. A different kind of drama unfolds in A Brother of Our God, which portrays the life of Adam Chmielowski, an aristocrat, a painter and veteran of the 1863 Polish January uprising against Russians. He lost a leg in battle. Educated in Munich, he eventually abandoned his artistic career to devote himself to the poor of Krakow. And as Brother Albert, he later founded the Albertine Brothers and Sisters and dedicated his life to serving the homeless. Albert Chmielowski was canonized by John Paul II on November the 12th, 1989 in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City. The play, The Brother of Our God, explores the tension between an artist and a different vocation, a radical service vocation. And it asks whether beauty and compassion ultimately lead toward the same horizon. And interestingly, one of the dramatic characters in that play, he's called the man unknown to anyone, so anonymous man, opposes very strongly Adam's ideas and his need to serve the poor, rejecting a path of mercy, love, and compassion. He speaks very strongly in favor of protest, anger, radical responses to social injustice. But Albert Chmielowski's mercy that he practices through acts of compassion and almsgiving takes in play the center stage. And we see Brother Albert striving to connect with the poor, building a living, authentic relationship. His gestures are not theoretical or symbolic alone. They become signs of solidarity and friendship, not instruments of domination or exploitation, as the Anonymous would have liked him to do. An interesting detail in this particular manuscript, the manuscript is preserved, as most of dramatic manuscripts of Karol Wojtyła, at the archives of the Metropolitan Curia in Krakow. On each page of the script, in the upper left corner, Wojtyła wrote the Jesuit motto, Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam, and in the upper right corner, in every single page, he would write J plus M, so Jesus and Mary. And between these inscriptions, he added quotations from Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort, in invocations to the saints, thus blending the artistic and the spiritual devotional practice on every single page. In his next play, Przed sklepem jubilera, The Jeweler's Shop, written in 1960, Wojtyła turns his attention to the mystery of marriage. The play unfolds among three couples, all united by the symbolic godlike figure of a jeweler who weighs wedding rings on a jewelry's scale. And actually, in fact, we find out that he symbolically measures something far more elusive, the weight of human love across generations. The jeweler's shop examines marriage not as a social institution, but as a spiritual covenant. The play explores the challenges of marital love, which gives human life its deepest meaning. And in one striking meditation, one of the characters, Adam, speaks. Sometimes human existence seems too short for love. At other times, love seems too short in relation to existence, or perhaps too shallow. In any case, each person has a certain life and a certain love at their disposal. How can one make them into a meaningful whole? So we see this meditative phrase in a drama, going away from structured lines. That same year, the young Bishop Wojtyła also published his philosophical work, Love and Responsibility, reflecting similar concerns about love, ethics, and human fulfillment. His last play, Promieniowanie ojcostwa, Radiation of Fatherhood, written in 1964 and expanded and printed in 1979, was published under the pseudonym Stanisław Andrzej Gruda. This is his last play, and it is sometimes described as a mystery play, but in fact it is a very deeply philosophical meditation on fatherhood, both human fatherhood and divine. Dialogues become a form of spiritual reflection as the play traces the emotional development of the main character, Adam. Symbolically, it is the biblical Adam, whose name in Hebrew means human or mankind. So Adam in the play must overcome confusion, selfishness, isolation, and grow into fatherhood and embrace the experience of having a child. And beneath this meditation lies a profound theological insight: the ultimate source of love is Christ. Wojtyła's dramatic imagination did not end with these 5 plays. Later texts also inspired theatrical interpretation. For example, his poetic cycle, The Roman Triptych, has been staged in various dramatic adaptations, transforming its meditation on creation and the Sistine Chapel into performance. So it can be done on stage. And similarly, his meditations on fatherhood, a poetic sequel to the Radiation of Fatherhood, has also inspired stage readings and performances exploring the meaning of fatherhood. As philosopher and literary scholar Michał Masłowski has observed, modern religious imagination has changed significantly. It's evolving. The once dominant images of hell that structured much of earlier religious discourse, and we've looked at Everman here as well, have largely receded into what he describes as the storeroom of history. Yet something far more fundamental remains: the persistent and intensive human desire for meaning. It is precisely this longing for meaning that Wojtyła's dramatic works try to address. And it is precisely here that the example of John Paul II as dramatist is very illuminating. And I have done this, I put the importance of his personal story, his personal example first, deliberately, because all too often we hide behind concepts that take us away from the real person. We tend to speak of his teaching and the lessons of John Paul II, but we forget that he lived what he preached. It was his energy, his gaze, his electrifying presence that inspired and activated those who were with him. And that is the very essence of drama. Shaped by the philosophical tradition of personalism, he approached faith not primarily through fear or abstract doctrine, but through the drama of person, the individual searching for truth, vocation, and relationship with the world, with the Creator. In his first 3 encyclicals, Redemptor Hominis, Dives in Misericordia, and Laborem Exercens, John Paul II develops the goals of the Second Vatican Council and affirms the anthropocentric shift in the Church's teaching. One of the most well-known formulations of John Paul II is that man is the first and fundamental way of the Church a way set forth by Christ himself. And we see very clearly that Wojtyła and his theology converge. His dramatic work staged not the spectacle of punishment, but the inner dialogue of the human person, struggling, choosing, and discovering meaning in his encounter with God and with others. Theater becomes a privileged space where faith is not imposed as a system, but revealed as a personal drama of freedom and responsibility. And I'm moving on to my final remarks. Wojtyła's calling to the priesthood was fulfilled in 1942, a moment that prompted a new perspective on his world and his personal experiences, and surely also on the place and significance of literature and theater and arts in human life, in his life. It seems that artistic creativity played an important role in his path towards the priesthood. In a letter to Kotlarczyk again, they corresponded very actively, he wrote, "Art is a companion of religion and a guide on the road to God." And many years later, he reaffirmed this conviction in a letter to artists and people of the arts, emphasizing that literature and theater have a mission. Through art, one can approach the most profound questions of human existence. Karol Wojtyła's generation experienced war, occupation, and cultural upheaval, but through theater they discovered a means of expressing and interpreting their historical situation. In a sense, he remained throughout his life what he called the homo theatralis, a thinker who perceived the world itself as a stage, which the deepest questions of human existence could answer. And perhaps this is why his dramatic works continue to invite renewed interpretation today. They remind us that theater is not merely an art of representation, but also the art of thinking. This is an invitation to observe the drama of the world, but also to continuously participate in it. And before I conclude, I think it's worth recalling that Karol Wojtyła never regarded theater as something separate, separated from the deeper question of human existence. Theater for him was not merely a place where stories were told. It was a place where human beings could approach experiences and find, but also resist simple explanation. A place to think about suffering, love, vocation, responsibility, and the mystery of God. Well, I think we should say here that the dramatic and theatrical legacy of John Paul II is not only relevant today, but I would also say it's particularly needed. And as Father Maciej Zięba, a friend of the Pope and mentor to many young people, once called John Paul II's legacy, said, "It is an open pit gold mine." And his view remains true, I think. These are invaluable, rich texts, ready-made dramatic literature, offering inspiration to contemporary performances and productions. And just as I stand here and speak today, a new chapter is being written, a new chapter in the history of the theater, but also in the history of Christianity and Christian culture. Within the walls of the Angelicum, recent productions of Wojtyła's dramas came out. These include Job, produced in the nearby Church of St. Dominic and Sixtus in 2022. Also, Our God's Brother, produced in 2023. Is that you? Here on the picture. Yes. The Roman Triptych by John Paul II, produced in 2024. That was the cover for the Roman Triptych poster. And Jeremiah in 2025. So it's looking good. Two of these productions were staged on Karol Wojtyła's birthday, May the 18th. That's for the very quick readers of the posters. But I thought, what a better birthday gift that an actor Pope could have wished for, right? All these have been directed by Jarosław Kilian here in Angelicum, and they represent the newest interpretations of Karol Wojtyła's dramatic works. So we have to do with this newest reading, with the fresh material, a fresh perspective on those plays. And we see history being written, and we're now looking forward to another production this spring, and I'm deeply honored that my talk is part of a larger theatrical theme this semester at Angelicum and allows us to think about theater and life deeper. We truly thrive in theater, bringing Wojtyła's vision to life for new audiences. And yeah, some more pictures, if I may. This is the Brother of Our God, Jeremiah poster. Jeremiah, I like the purple coat, quiet. Yes, beautiful memories. And Job, that is the one that was produced on the 18th of May. Right. Speaking about plays, of course, I wouldn't be able to quote so easily and to teach if not the effort of the translators. And while, I appreciate the work of Jarosław Kilian as the director who works with this material, I also have to acknowledge the dedication and the effort of many scholars and artists who translated and put together the dramatic works of Karol Wojtyła in editorial shape. And Bolesław Taborski is one person in particular that I would like to honor here. Thanks to his translations, audiences were able to read and to work with Karol Wojtyła's plays. Taborski was a distinguished poet and essayist based in London. There's also a wartime generation, as you see. He translated Wojtyła's dramas into English and also provided critical interpretations and commentary that helped make his plays accessible all around the world. Besides Taborski, also other translators across the world have contributed to bringing John Paul II's literary and dramatic voice into translation, and there are also Italian editions of his poetic and theatrical works that present the original Polish text alongside translations. So it's all there on the table for us to take up and to work with. These plays remain there, they wait, they are ready to be rediscovered by theater directors, by actors, scholars, and audiences. And perhaps that is the final invitation contained within Wojtyła's dramatic imagination, not simply to watch the drama of the world unfold, but to recognize that each of us already is part of this drama. Thank you very much.
Professor Rzegocka, thank you very much for this beautiful lecture. And now we have time for the questions.
Mrs. Rzegocka, thank you for your lecture, and I'd like to ask if Wojtyła's theatrical experience somehow impacted his way of liturgical celebration. How it might impact it.
It's a good one. I think in terms of his confidence, in terms of his sense of space, spacing out his gestures, definitely. They're the little things. They are the little things. The way you enunciate, the way you produce the voice production, right? Those little things that he would work on with Kotlarczyk back in Wadowice, the school theater, and then later on in that underground theater, they definitely worked later as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that beautiful presentation. I have a question, as more of a personal question. Did you ever meet St. John Paul II? And if
yes,
you did, can you share a bit about that?
I did, sister. And I was going to include this picture of myself with Pope John Paul II, but I thought it's embarrassing, so I deleted it, yes. So I count myself among the JP2 generation, and all this passion, the way I speak about him as an actor is only because I could see him personally perform all those things, perform in a good sense, right, as I argued. So I try to carry it forward and to share this reflection on his presence, on his personality and his message forward. But yes, it's these meetings what I think is the essence of John Paul II, the energy that he was able to sustain and share.
Thank you, Professor. That was very well spoken. And my question is, as students or as lovers of John Paul II, how do you think we can continue or encourage his legacy and his love for art, love for culture and theater in our own way?
Yes, I think the most important thing is not to put him in this antiquities collection, right? Not to think that he's not a person to look into today, right? Not to delegate him to some museum-like spaces. I think it's all very fresh. Well, I'm in awe of this work. Well, I kind of deconstructed this juvenile and mature work separation, which I think is rather fake, but it's all very, very readable. And we have agreed here, reading it with students, that, well, English translation does it a good service. So it's actually very fresh, and just taking it, you know, some scenes, little bits, some improvisations that are spun out of his theatrical play, I think would work well. That's regarding his drama, but also his poetry. There are very strong poems among it. One of my favorites and very moving is his early poem dedicated to his mother, Emilia. It's very moving, and it's very, very deep. Simple also, in a way. And so there's a lot in terms of material, in terms of inspiration, right? We sometimes look for inspiration. We're desperate to get the new material, but it's just all here, in English, in Italian, any other language, it's available. Thank you. Yes.
So I also have one question. You mentioned that Karol Wojtyła's plays are similar to Greek tragedies, yeah? And that are full of some kind of religion relations and metaphysical also references. So do you think that in contemporary art, contemporary theatre, we can find such kind of features, some kind of ideas?
Transcendental ideas,
Yeah,
metaphysical elements.
because your subject of this lecture was the thinking the world through the theatre. So what is some kind of mystery in the old-fashioned problems? Okay, so do we really find such kind of ideas in contemporary theatre? That was such kind of these ideas present, like in Shakespeare, like in Greek tragedies, like Wojtyła's plays. Do we really can find today?
It exists, yes. We can have a transcendence. We can have metaphysical moments in theater. Well, we know that theater today is a very highly contested area, right? It's very often subject to some rewriting, some radical reinterpretations. There's some negativity, but also there are directors and there are groups that try to put it back together, that use theater to show a human way to meaning, towards meaning, and that kind of, maybe not directly, not in open text, but also take us to the transcendent, take us to the creator. But it very often requires some work, but it exists. It's not entirely negative what we see today on the stage, on the stages of the world. Also, there is a comeback of liturgical plays and mystery plays that are now produced in a modern way, not in this historical costume, but they also kind of carry the meaning for the modern audiences. So there are different spaces in theater. Polish theater is also doing very well in that respect, where a person of faith or a person considering the journey towards their creator could find some rest and some inspiration.
So I wanted to ask whether there are some comparative researchers about John Paul II's plays and his teachings, or his writings, philosophical ones especially. Can we distinguish some similarities or differences between what we can see or establish on the basis of his plays and on what we see in his writings?
Well, you have a good point here. This work has been done partially, but there is so much more to be done. Even now, as I was writing this lecture, I was discovering little things that resonate with his writings, and this hasn't been done. So this is an area of research, of a potential research for younger scholars as well. We've done the documentation, we've collected the manuscripts, we've deciphered. It is a beautiful handwriting, but we've done that, yeah. So of course, as a researcher, you start with collecting your material, putting it together on the table. Well, the history of the Rhapsodic Theatre has been researched by Professor Popiel, so he really went into the secret police files, to find, the Polish hell there. But it's been done. But interpretive job is still to be done. There's so much more that we can pull out of his dramas. Okay, the biblical layers, of course, very rich. The Polish history layers that need to be also reinterpreted for every generation, and also those larger themes, like I did with Lear, but also with some other writers. He was well-read playwright. He was really, really into reading. We can see that with this quotation. So there is a lot. It's rich, but also it's approachable. It's something that invites you to work with. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that it will be done. Yes.
My question is quite similar to Veronica's. Reading John Paul II's encyclicals and knowing his dramas, have you ever noticed any references or inspirations that he put into his encyclical letters or in his adhortations?
I like that question. Yes, I really like that question.
Yeah,
and
from his own dramas.
Yes, and it's so I'm so inspired by just doing this today, and just preparing. There's so much more. I think there are links, like with this idea of Lord's mercy. We find it so early, 1940s, right? Well, Sister Faustina would already, be dead, but then the whole cult, it developed after the war. So there are some intuitions in his writing that then can be better understood in the context of his encyclicals, of his papal writings. It's amazing, yes.
Thank you, Professor Rzegocka, once again for the fascinating lecture, and to our audience for the presence and great discussion.
Thank you very much, Father.
We also cordially invite you all to join us, the Angelicum, for another JP2 theatre experience this academic year, which will be a public performance of Karol Wojtyła's play, The Jeweler's Shop, by Angelicum students, which will be heard on May 18th, John Paul II 106th birthday anniversary. Thank you,
Wonderful.
you and all. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Dziękuję.
So if you would like to take a part in this John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła's play, you are very welcome, because it's an open possibilities. All students from Angelicum can take a part on this. Not only the students of the JP2 studies, but for all students are invited to take a part in this theatre. You're welcome.